I'm back. I'm here.
You're back. Jordan
I
has been
know.
with us since 6 p.m. She took a short nap and said, "Oh, I
Yeah,
can't
I'm
believe I
sorry.
slept." Why are you?
It
You're
was
allowed
too
to sleep.
long. It was too
No, it
long. I
wasn't.
felt so bad. My heart was like
Why?
racing. I don't understand.
You know what though, Jordan? I want to stop and I want to point something out. How old are you, Jordan?
22.
Can I ask that? You're 22.
Yeah.
She took a short nap and she feels. I mean, I know how old you are, but I wanted you to tell people. She took a
Yeah.
short nap and she's been in this. She has been behind the scenes planning this event, and it has taken a massive amount of planning for weeks, working continuously. She took a short nap, not because she's not allowed to. We have to rest, we have to sleep, we have to rejuvenate to be able to do this work. She feels badly because she is so emotionally and intellectually invested in the outcomes that we are trying to approve, that we are trying to prove and trying to get through, that she didn't want to miss a moment of it. Is that a fair assessment?
Of course, 100%. And I think I feel so committed to everyone involved, our entire team, let alone all the amazing presenters we've had, that
Hmm.
one, I don't want to miss any bit of knowledge and wisdom that I can gain from any of the presenters, and I also just know all the work that you've all been putting in, that we've all been putting in together. So just having our teams back, the presenters, information coming in, so many different things. So yeah, this is work I feel passionate about personally, professionally, every sector. So and Dr.
So let
Fallon
me
was
ask you.
amazing too.
I know. So she was just
Yeah, so
lovely. And
great.
Dr. Edwards before, so much
Oh,
inspiration. People have been asking, is this going to be available? Yes, we are recording every single second of it. It will be available unedited, and we will be sending it out to folks and posting it as soon as it is. As we are transitioning to Dr. Yohuru Williams, who's going to give us a part two of Be the Challenger that he started yesterday. And then on the hour, we're going to hear from Dr. Hassan Jeffries from The Ohio State University. As we are transitioning to that, I want to ask you something. Last summer, when
yeah.
you joined the Institute for Common Power, it was supposed to be for a short internship for 3 months. You're here with us now. You're about to become a fellow for the Institute for Common Power. When you graduated last year with a science degree, and now you finished a master's degree in a year, because that's the kind of young people we have here, you had sights on being a medical professional, possibly a physician. And people asked you regularly, why are you getting involved with an organization that teaches history and specifically, largely African American history and the history of marginalized people if you want to go into medicine? How do you answer that question?
I think every single time is the history that you're teaching, that we're learning this entire 24 hours, is so deeply intrinsically interwoven into every single thing that we do in our lives. Everything that we do is being affected by the people before us, the events that occurred before us. This history is so strongly connected to the now, to the present. I mean, that's part of our the reason we're doing this: history then, history now. And so you can see that
Yes.
in when you go to the doctor, when you need to have when you have an emergency, you need to see a physician, you need to see a nurse, you need to see any medical professional. The way in which structural racism is affecting BIPOC individuals, women, specifically African Americans in this country, is devastating, first and foremost, and is something that I've been extremely passionate about changing. Creating a more equitable healthcare system is extremely important, and the way in which African Americans are being affected by healthcare in this country currently is something that we can't just turn a blind eye to. And I've been so fortunate enough to be part of this organization where you and David and Charles have taken that on, and we have our partnership with the University of Washington Department of Medicine. We have all these actions that we're taking towards providing the education that's necessary for those medical professionals so they can understand their unconscious biases, and we can try to change this for the better. That's something that I've super proud of, that partnership with UW. There's anything we can do to try to further the education, but it's the history, it's truly the history that you guys are teaching, that we're learning, that are affecting us, that's still affecting us today. I mean, it's affected me when I've gone to my family, everyone, if you I'm sure if you ask a BIPOC individual, they have a situation where they are treated disparagingly in healthcare. So it's something that just can't continue, I feel like.
You're talking about these racial biases in medicine and health outcomes that a lot of people don't even realize exist if they haven't experienced them. that studies have shown repeatedly that when people are able to confront their own biases, when they can learn the history, that's how we begin to dismantle them. Now, you're talking about a partnership, that it was because of your interest that we pursued this partnership with the University of Washington Department of Medicine. And I know people listening are saying, well, what's that about? So last question before we go to Dr. Williams. Can you tell us about that partnership?
Yeah, of course. So just by the work that we're doing and the amazing people that I get to be around with Dr. Scott and Dr. Domke and Charles, we've had relationships with, members of faculty, University of Washington, and Dr. Scott and Dr. Domke. And so with their connections, we're able to create a partnership with the University of Washington Department of Medicine through their DEI, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion program and department. And we have lecture series with renowned medical professionals, cardiac and neurosurgeons, people who focus on, the way in which health disparities are affecting BIPOC individuals, how we eliminating racial disparities in healthcare. Jeffrey White earlier in the middle of the night, I think it was, or last night, early morning, he kind of dove into it a little bit more as well. But that's what we're focusing on, how we can eliminate those racial disparities and providing education to not only medical professionals, but ourselves as potential patients, and how we can advocate for ourselves when we are, if we ever end up in an unfortunate situation, what we can do to protect ourselves in those situations.
Absolutely. And if you go to Institute for Common Power, instituteforcommonpower.org, you can join our newsletter and find out information about those lectures that are with the University of Washington Department of Medicine. They're free. We never charge. We're going to have another one at the end of June. Everybody in the public, whether you're a medical professional or not, is invited to attend. The speakers come and speak to medical professionals and to lay persons to educate us all. All right. So Jordan, thank you. We will see you shortly. Where are you calling us from? Where are you right now?
I'm in Phoenix, Arizona. So if I could really quick recommend this book, Black Man in a White Coat, if anyone is more interested in hearing about the doctor's reflections on race and medicine. So if you're interested, I highly recommend. But yeah, I'm in Phoenix, Arizona for now, and I'll be here.
Okay, thank you, Jordan. We're going to see you in a minute. And thank you for reminding not only us at the Institute, but people out there, that even the medical profession, even healthcare and healthcare outcomes have something to do with history, the way that we learn history and the way that we unlearn incorrect history. So thanks, Jordan. We'll talk to you soon.
Of course.
All right. Dr. Williams, you ready?
I am ready. Thank you, Dr. Scott. Thank you for the toss. Appreciate that. I only have a few minutes with you right now, but I want to be very clear with everyone who's watching that over the last almost day that we've been together talking about these issues, we want to understand, and we want people to understand, there's a necessity to take action, that it's not simply what we share in space together over this 24 hours that's meaningful. It's what we do with that information. Now, in a few minutes, my brother Hassan Jeffries will be here to share some wisdom around the importance of this moment and how to take action. But I want to take a little bit of a challenger moment. I want to revisit what I shared with you last night about what it means to be the challenger. And I want to do that with you by talking about somebody who's often misinterpreted, deliberately so, by those on the other side of this question who want to reduce Dr. Martin Luther King to a soundbite. That Dr. King's words also can provide some inspiration to us in terms of how we think about being the challenger. Dr. King said, shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. So to not be dialed in, to not understand what's happening in Texas and in Florida and in Virginia and in other states, even your state, is a detriment to the ultimate goal of ensuring that we are, as Dr. Ashley Farmer put it, moving the needle in the direction, or bending. Earlier, Dr. Harry Edwards talked about freedom as a constant struggle. When yesterday, Wilmer Leon kind of laid the foundations for our conversation together in terms of these days. When we talk about kind of revisiting that familiar terrain, we think about Reconstruction, it's Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina, right? And today it's Florida and Texas. And the reality is that we every day have to make commitments to challenging inequality where it manifests itself in the hopes of ensuring that progress toward a just democracy. Having said that, in his book, Strength to Love, Dr. King said something that is very important in this moment for how we're thinking about how we take action, how we build solidarity, how we move intelligently, but aggressively against the forces of injustice that we see so prevalent in our society in so many ways. Dr. King wrote, sincerity and conscientiousness in and of themselves are not enough. History has proven that these noble virtues may degenerate into tragic vices. Nothing in the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity. And I would suggest to you today, in this moment, that to remain ignorant of what is taking place with regard to what's happening here in Florida and other places, to be conscientiously, and again, it's a harsh term, but an important term, stupid, blind to the necessity of taking action is a problem. In fact, King goes one step further. He goes, devoid of intelligence, goodness and conscientiousness will become brutal forces leading to shameful crucifixions. Never, he argues, must the church tire of reminding people they have a moral responsibility to be intelligent. Now, King talked about the church, but I'm going to be very clear, and I want to direct this at Governor DeSantis, but I also want to direct it at all of us. Never must we tire of reminding ourselves that we have a moral responsibility to be intelligent. And that includes learning, sharing, and investing in our history as a conduit to make change in our communities. So I want to end with you in this challenger moment by sharing with you some thoughts from Dr. King from a speech that not many people know and not many talk about that he gave in 1967. He was invited by the American Psychological Association to address that august body. And Dr. King said something to them in that moment that I think is appropriate for us as we think about how we navigate these challenges in our contemporary moment. And Dr. King said something to them that was really powerful because he used their discipline to help them understand. We think about Dr. King as simply a preacher who was able to string together beautiful words, but there's substance for those people who want to reduce him to a soundbite that you really have to dig into his writings to understand. And what Dr. King said to the American Psychological Association that day was, you who are in the field of psychology have given us a great word. It is the word maladjusted. The word is probably used more than any other word in psychology. It's a good word. Now, most of us are not accustomed to thinking about the word maladjusted as being good, but you got to follow Dr. King's logic here. King continues, certainly it is good that in dealing with what the word implies, you are declaring that destructive maladjustment should be destroyed. You are saying that all must seek the well-adjusted life in order to avoid neurotic and schizophrenic personalities, destructive mental states he's talking about here. And this is in terms of the individual, but King goes one step further, and I think you'll find this fascinating. But he says, while in the field of psychology, we're working toward this adjusted life, that we don't want maladjustment. He says, when it comes to social issues, when it comes to challenging inequality in our society, on the other hand, he writes, I'm sure that we recognize there are some things in our society, some things in our world to which we should never be adjusted. He continues, there are some things concerning which we must always be maladjusted if we are to be people of goodwill. And what are those things? Well, he begins, we must never adjust ourselves to racial discrimination and racial segregation. And whether we see that manifested in terms of efforts to restrict voting rights for people of color throughout this country, African Americans in particular, whether we see this in the lingering impact as Jordan and Dr. Scott were just talking about in terms of the social determinants of health, whether we're talking about this in terms of housing, wherever we see racial segregation, racial inequality, whether we're talking about this with regard to police brutality, we have to remain maladjusted. Because when we're not, it becomes easy for people to become blind to the injustices they see on a daily basis. I have to remind people often, if not for the global pandemic, if not for what happened in 2020, George Floyd's murder might have just been another moment that had passed people's consciousness because we become so accustomed to the cheapness of Black life in terms of these types of encounters between police and law enforcement. We have become adjusted. We have become adjusted and indifferent to that racial terror that so many were trying to call our attention to, particularly after the killing of Trayvon Martin in Florida. Dr. King continues, we must never adjust ourselves to religious bigotry. And I'm sharing that with you here at Greater Mount Zion AME, but I also want to talk about this in terms of Mother Emanuel, where the violence is visited on Black parishioners in the church. And I want to be clear that as all the scholars who've come to you, all the teachers who've shared lessons can attest, the church has always been essential to Black freedom struggles. And I don't just want to focus on the Christian church, although that's important, but we sometimes forget Martin Luther King was a minister, but so was Malcolm X. Faith matters. Third, King says, we must never adjust ourselves to economic conditions that take necessities from the many to give luxuries to the few. And this is tough for folks, because this is the Dr. King that makes us uncomfortable, because he's pledging us to recognize that people often talk about this in terms of the triplets that he identified, militarism and materialism. But I like it here in this context because it's even more direct, that when we see the unequal distribution of wealth, when we see the impact of the unequal distribution of wealth, we have a duty to respond. So it's very easy for us to recognize that in terms of what's happening, in terms of the pushback against African-American history and Black studies. It might be more difficult for us to understand that we need well-funded schools and that we have to commit ourselves to tax dollars that ensure that our schools are well-funded, that teachers are well-supported, that we can have small class sizes, that students get a nutritious start to the day, that we don't talk about communities like when I went to Ferguson, Missouri, after the killing of Michael Brown, and you walk into a school district where 98% of the students are on free and reduced lunch, and we know there is no greater indicator of poverty in this country than the number of students on free and reduced lunch. We can't become adjusted to that reality. Last but not least, King concludes, we must never adjust ourselves to the madness of militarism and the self-defeating effects of physical violence. And my friends, I want to be very clear with you. We can see that manifest not just in the assault on Black bodies that we see in incidents like the murder of George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery or Breonna Taylor, but we can see that in the failure of legislators to deal with the issue of guns in our larger society, in a culture that's awash in violence, in the indifference that comes from being so comfortable with that indifference that we become blind, nose blind, visually impaired to taking action. Last night, I asked you to think about being the challenger. And I did it in the context of Muhammad Ali and talking about Pat Begley's comment that Ali was the greatest, not because he was the champ, but because he was always the challenger. But one of the abilities of the challenger is to be what King called creatively maladjusted, not just maladjusted. King admitted that's a bad thing, but creative maladjustment means that by definition, we are looking for these things in our society and we're trying to figure out ways to undermine them so they don't continue to poison and leach in ways that by their very nature make us less human. Now, I want to be clear. You could read a book like Isabel Wilkerson's Caste, in which she talks about how racism and structural inequality is kind of like living in an old house. And if you've ever owned an old house, you know what she means by this analogy. You know, in an old house, you might have mold, and other issues. And if they go unaddressed, pretty soon you become blind to the fact that the structure, the dwelling that you're living in is actually toxic to your very being. In fact, I want to give it to you in a slightly different way. I want to talk about Stephen King, who wrote a very influential essay a long time ago called Why We Crave Horror Films. And Stephen King said, there's something interesting about horror films. He says, horror films, in order to be successful, have to work on a couple of different levels. See, when you're 10 years old and you watch a horror film, what scares you is the fact that there is a monster in your closet and your parents don't believe you and they send you off to bed. And as they stand in the door, committing you to your bedroom because they're tired of you talking about the demon that's in your closet. The demon is in the closet peering at you and going, it's going to be a great time tonight, because your parents don't believe you. But King also writes, Stephen King, that when you're 42, the horror is that you've sunk your entire life, your life savings, as an investment into a home. And you discover that that home, pipes leak, there's green stuff oozing out of the wall, your kid won't sleep in the bedroom. In fact, Stephen King writes in that article, he knew the Amityville Horror was going to be a hit when he saw a wife turn to her husband in the middle of the movie when the green stuff was oozing out of the wall, and she said to her husband, oh my goodness, the bills, the bills. My friend Dr. King talked about it in this way. The bill has come due. We can face it with courage, with creative maladjustment, with a sense of dignity and appeal to humanity, or we can face it in terror. But the reality is, in this moment, we have to face it. And I would argue that we need to face it as the challengers. You've heard so much great history. You've been exposed to so many great minds and ideas. But I want to emphasize again what King is commending us to think about in this moment, how these words should resonate with us in our contemporary moment. And they're calling us not only to be the challenger from a superficial standpoint, but through acts of everyday democracy, through creative maladjustment. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure this afternoon to be able to introduce in just a few moments one of the brightest minds of our generation. The reason I love this scholar so much is that when we talk about creative maladjustment, when we talk about really digging into the words of someone like the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, when we really start talking about understanding the roots of the Black Power movement, when we start understanding the importance of the Great Migration and how those ideas migrate from the South to the North, and how, and I want to be clear here, my sister Martha Biondi writes about this in her book, To Stand and Fight About New York. When you leave the southern side of the plantation and you go to the other side of the plantation and you find the other side of the plantation is just as bad as the side you left, you got two choices. You can go to Canada or you can stand and fight. And the record of the civil rights movement is about those people who chose to stand and fight because they had invested so much in this house that they would not flee from the horror that presented itself in terms of the violence, in terms of the political chicanery, in terms of the economic inequality, in terms of the indifference. And so I commit to you today as you listen to Dr. Hassan Jeffries, and as you take in the rest of the day, because you're going to hear from Michael Butler, you're going to hear from members of the American Civil Liberties Union this afternoon who are going to be here to talk about how you can take action. As I come back to you later in this afternoon at 3 o'clock and talk to you about how you can teach this through teaching by proxy, commenting by proximity. And then this afternoon, as Hassan Jeffries comes back and talks to Bob Zellner, a civil rights icon, pioneer, veteran. The key is to take action.